Hi, everyone. I'm just going to wait a minute or two so all of the audience has a chance to log in, and then we'll begin our program. And you can see our panelists now, and we're excited to bring this to you. And there's Ann waving. Yay. All right, I think we'll get going. I want to welcome everybody to another NBO Presents. I'm Pam Morton. I'm the Executive Director of the National Basketry Organization, and we're excited to have you join us today for Remembering Dorothy Gill Barnes. It's a discussion with moderators Ann Coddington and Amie Adelman and panelists Pat Hickman, Jill Green, Ann Bremner, and Joan Kerrigan. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions. We'll get to them at the end of the program. We won't be taking them during the program. As you can imagine, these webinars have a financial impact on NBO. I've put a donation link in the Q&A section so you can go to nationalbasketry.org to the donate tab. We appreciate your donation in any amount. And now I am going to turn this program over to Ann and Amie. I'll be hiding myself and I'll come back later on as we finish. Have a good day.
Hello, everybody. I wanted to just say welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for coming to share in this tribute to Dorothy Gill Barnes. Dorothy was a beloved member and an influential member of our basketry community. So we're really glad to come together and share memories and share some images of her work. Dorothy Gill Barnes was born in Strawberry Point. Oh, wait, before I do that, back up one. Sorry about that. I jumped the gun. I'd like to introduce our presenters today, Amie Adelman, Ann Bremner, Joan Kerrigan, Jill Green, and Pat Hickman. And I think you're really gonna enjoy their sharing stories and memories of their time with Dorothy. So I'm gonna read a quick bio and then we'll get started with the stories. Okay. Dorothy Gill Barnes was born in Strawberry Point, Iowa on May 30th, 1927. She had 3 sisters. Her father owned a furniture store and a funeral parlor, her mother a homemaker. She studied at Coe College in Iowa and at Minneapolis School of Art and graduated with a BA and MA in art education from the University of Iowa. During her MA, she met her husband, Marshall Barnes. They had 4 children, 3 sons and a daughter, and eventually 5 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren. Dorothy was an advocate for peace and was a member of Weave a Real Peace, an organization that sponsored projects aimed at bringing people together through textiles. Dorothy lived much of her life in the Columbus, Ohio area and died of complications from COVID on November 23rd, 2020. Early on, she attended fibers classes with John Reese, Dwight Stump, and Ruth Mary Pappenthine, and at the time was shown the work of Ed Rossback and John McQueen. Dorothy began exhibiting in the mid-70s, first at the Columbus Museum of Art, then entered a show in London called the International Exhibition of Miniature Textiles, where she met Jane Sauer and Kei Sekamachi, among others. Her entry in the fibers world was through seeing shows and exhibiting in the 70s and 80s. After seeing her work in Fiber Arts magazine, Jack Linner Larson took an interest and helped promote her in the fibers movement. Early on, she was also invited to exhibit in a show at Miller Brown in San Francisco, where she met Ed Rossback, Pat Hickman, and Lillian Elliott, all artists who she greatly admired and were a source of inspiration to her. Dorothy sought to create artwork that honored the growing things from which they came, her materials respectfully harvested from nature. She was connected with the natural world and created pieces that struck a harmonious balance with it. Dorothy was known for her raised drawings in bark called dendroglyphs, which she made by carving into the outer bark of living trees and then returning later to pull away what had formed as the tree healed over. Dorothy taught at a number of different schools, including the Capital University in Columbus and in dozens of workshops, including Haystack, Penland, Aramont, as well as overseas in Denmark, New Zealand, and Australia. Among many others, Dorothy's work is in the collection of the De Young Museum in San Francisco, the Museum of Art and Design in New York City, the Renwick Gallery of the Smithsonian American Art Museum in Washington, D.C. Dorothy Gill Barnes has exhibited work all over the world and showed with several galleries, including Sybaris and Brown Grotta. She was a fellow of the American Crafts Council and received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the National Museum of Women in the Arts in Washington, D.C., as well as from the National Basketry Organization. So now I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Ann Bremner. Ann is a freelance editor, writer, and arts professional based in Columbus, Ohio. She grew up in Worthington, Ohio, and knew Dorothy Gill Barnes since she was a child. The two became friends as both became active in local and regional arts programs in the late 70s and grew closer when they taught together at Capital University in the 80s. Since about 2000, Ann has been helping Dorothy with recalcitrant computers and other increasingly varied projects. She's had the privilege and pleasure of acting as the in-house editor and curator for Dorothy's exhibition since 2007. And I think you're really going to enjoy her stories. So take it away, Ann.
Thank you. The first thing that I have to show you is this cartoon of Dorothy, totally surrounded and engulfed by branches, pieces of bark, flowers, other growing things, that was made for her by a friend and neighbor named Tom Crane. And the gentleman with the large nose saying, "That's Dorothy Barnes, her muse beckons from the woods," is Tom. He grew things for Dorothy, particularly ferns, and from which she could get fern stems. And I think the cartoon just captures so much what those of us who knew Dorothy and remember her so well think about when we see her true love and delight in being out in nature, and her love of everything in nature, from the most beautiful flower to things like kudzu and bindweed, and her interest in making all of them into sort of what she sees. This is Dorothy in the 1990s, harvesting pine bark. One of the things that made it possible for Dorothy to do the wonderful things with bark, and you've already seen some of the things that she made out of pine bark and the way she loved to fold it and bend it and pleat it and carve it and do all kinds of other things, was because she had access to places where she could go out in nature, including a dear friend who you see in the background here named Ora Anderson, who had a fair amount of land in Ohio near Athens, where he had pine trees growing along his drive that people kept running into, and they then need to be cleared off, or just woods that needed to be trimmed. And this was Dorothy's respectful harvesting, that she didn't sacrifice trees just for her work. She liked to rescue and reclaim trees and bark that otherwise would have been tossed out as woods were thinned or yards were cleaned up. She got a lot of mulberry from people who thought that those trees with their lovely purple berries were very messy, which they are. And so they'd let Dorothy come and dig them out, or she would dig them out of her own yard. I want to show you how some images that suggest how much Dorothy loved working out in nature, and how much the process of working in nature, both for her making and for her harvesting, fed into everything she wanted. And these are kind of funny old fuzzy images that come from slides made from old paste boards that Dorothy made herself to use in her lectures. And what they're showing is a piece that she exhibited with the title Grafted Willow and also Woven Willow. And she actually grafted the willow twigs to make it appear as if they were woven, and then let that weaving grow for 9 years before she harvested the tree and then exhibited it. We can go on to the next image, I think. And you can see on the right here, a close-up of the weaving that Dorothy did to hide some of the grafts, and also of just the way the grafts of the trees come together to create this appearance of weaving. And it's Dorothy and Aura on the left. Dorothy was very much a sort of it takes a village kind of artist. She liked to have lots and lots and lots of people involved in her work. And she then went on to exhibit Grafted or Woven Willow a couple different times, always changing it just slightly. And here it is standing upright. The first time she showed it, it was down on its side, but here it is standing upright in a show in the McConnell Art Center, which is the art center in Worthington where she lived. And this was its inaugural show in 2008. Which Dorothy was sort of the lead artist taking part in. Dorothy loved what she could do with things from nature, but she also loved just the miracles that she would find in nature. And I think increasingly in the later part of her life, that was very much a part of her process and of her the delight that she took in her work. And we could really see that in the next slide, which is of a piece that she again showed in all kinds of different configurations from about 2000 to 2010 that she referred to as Marked By. The first 4 pieces of Marked By, which are the 2 on the far left and the 2 on the far right, are aspen, which she harvested when she was attending a workshop in Aspen, Colorado. And she was visiting a property where she had been told there was going to be some development. And so she wanted to grab the wood and the bark that she could before it was lost to development. And in the inside piece of aspen on the left, you see these very, very gentle marks. And Dorothy's informant, the caretaker of this property, told her that those lovely gentle scratches had been made by a bear, while the deep gouges on the inside right right branch, there, thank you, Amy, were made by an elk in rut. And the caregiver, Dorothy asked the caregiver, how do you know? And she said, I know because I shot it. Want to have some elk sausage for lunch? And they did. And then she gave Dorothy a little piece of elk hide to stick into one of the marks that she then cleaned out and deepened. So that was how the piece began, with just her love of these different kinds of marks from nature. But then over the next years, people kept bringing her other things, and she started exhibiting them without necessarily messing around with it, although it also became part of what she did to show her own dendroglyphs. The sort of center dark wood piece, which is cherry, has Dorothy's dendroglyphs on it, as well as a little drawer that you pull out using the little where a twig has broken off. That a wood turner made for her. But then besides that, you recognize beaver chew and some insect trails and some other insect damage and rotting that makes this one very, very lacy piece that's right to the left of the cherry. And she just loved these. So she loved the marks of nature. She loved the textures, the colors. And more, I think she wanted to sort of show these things off in her work, as well as show sort of what she could do with the bark and the wood. She did love baskets, and she thought that when she started bringing these natural materials into her basketry and sculpture making, really, she finally was able to combine her love of sewing, her love of carpentry, and her love of being in the woods. I'm going to show you now, if you go right on, one of the pieces, or I'm going to take you through the process of her making, one of the pieces for a show that she was in at the Center for Art in Wood in Philadelphia in 2016. And it was probably, it wasn't Dorothy's last show, but it was probably the last one for which she made all new work. And by this time, Dorothy was already 89 and still incredibly strong and spry, but she liked to have sort of a lot of helpers along. And she had for many years been harvesting bark from trees on a wooded property that she owned near Brinkhaven, Ohio, which is about an hour drive from Columbus. It's up towards the Amish country. And Dorothy had I think, discovered and found out that if you don't girdle a tree, if you don't cut the bark out from all the way around it, it can survive with strips of bark taken off. And Dorothy would, with her own chainsaw at the right time, which was usually May and June, make a cut at the base of the tree and then just rip the bark up for 10, 15, 20 feet before it came off at the top. These are really big trees. And she loved that strength and regeneration of this shagbark hickory bark, and also of things like cork, and you know, the dendroglyphs and the way they healed theirself in her dendroglyph work. So she had been gathering these strips for a number of years by 2015, and we can see her working on one of them in the next image, where she is making sure that she got all the sort of insects out of it. She would make them to a straight length. She would mess around with bending them in different ways after soaking them. And you can see one of those bends in the piece of bark on her table. This is in her backyard. And she decided that for this show at Center for Art in Wood, she would go ahead and use these pieces of bark that she had been collecting over many years, as well as the new ones that we could gather that spring, in order to, well, make a giant basket. And we'll see it in the next images. And here's Dorothy with it in process, and you get a sense of the scale from her spry little figure there as the basket was in progress. And she's made bends in bark, in the bark, and made some of the bark curl and twirl. She's left some of it so it's very rough. She has little ties that are holding the rounds that go around it. She eventually changes those to natural materials as well. And if you go on, this is an installation view of Dorothy's 3 pieces in that 2016 show. The shagbark hickory basket on the left, and then this large necklace, which also has some glass pieces in it, as well as paulownia wood. And then in the center, one of her many pieces from mulberry, here showing not only a dendroglyph that spirals up one of it, although I know it's hard to see in this slide, but also that glorious red-orange roots that come down at the bottom. And you'll see more images of these pieces and the work that went into making them in the little video at the end of today's presentation.
Thank you so much, Anne. That was incredible. So nice to hear a firsthand account of how she makes her work. Our next speaker is Joan Kerrigan. Joan is a full-time basket maker and basketry teacher living on Salt Spring Island, British Columbia. Over the past 30 years, her passion for baskets has led her to study, travel, and explore many different techniques and materials. Her main inspiration comes from the plant materials she respectfully harvests from nature. Joan was a student of Dorothy's, and over the years, Dorothy became a friend, mentor, and travel buddy, as well as a role model. Joan's going to share some of her memories of time spent with Dorothy.
Thank you, Anne. Yeah, I first met Dorothy at a workshop I took with her at the Basketry Focus Conference in 1991 in Toronto. And that was actually my very first exposure to basket making. So on that second day of the conference, when I saw her work and her magic teaching box, my passion for basketry was sealed. That was 30 years ago, when I was in my 20s, young and impressionable, and who better to cross my path than Dorothy Gill Barnes. In 1999, she came and taught a workshop here on Salt Spring Island, British Columbia, where I live. And from that point on, we kept in touch and shared some travel adventures. I visited Dorothy at her home several times over the years, and it was a pleasure to be surrounded by her work and enjoy her daily rituals and just being inspired by her beautiful spirit. She put me to work peeling pine and mulberry bark in her yard, and we carefully dug out a mulberry tree at the back of her studio. She was interested in that transition between the tree trunk above ground and the tree roots below ground, as we saw in Anne's photos. There was also just something interesting always going on at her home, and what stays with me is the daily pleasure she took in the simple things, and the great care she took to honor the materials and the natural world around her. In 2009, our mutual friend Eva Seidenfaden hosted an event called Focus on Bark in Denmark, and the idea was to introduce Danish basket makers to the possibilities of weaving with bark. Dorothy was invited as a special guest, or like an artist in residence, while I taught a 3-day workshop along with Tim Johnson and Anna-Maria Vitanen from Finland. It was a magical event, and Dorothy jumped right in with full enthusiasm. She was thrilled to be able to sleep in Eva's treehouse and explore the countryside on a bicycle, one of her passions. The surrounding property is a working forest, so everyone had access to a wide variety of trees and bark, and Dorothy worked with some of the pine, cedar, and wild cherry trees. Our next adventure was in Saskatchewan at the Emma International Artist Collaboration in 2012. Dorothy had attended 2 years earlier and asked me to join her this time round, and although I had no idea what this event was about, I told her I was definitely in. I had, and it really did turn out to be an incredible experience. So what happens is over 100 artists from around the world, all working in different mediums, come together to explore ways to collaborate and share skills. So it's a full week of focused making, pure heaven. And there's blacksmiths and master carvers and wood turners and jewelers and on and on. And at the end of the week, all the artwork is auctioned off to raise money to fund the next collaboration. I'm so grateful to Dorothy for introducing me to this event, which I have continued to attend every 2 years. Next adventure was accompanying Dorothy to Penland School of Craft in 2013 when she received their Honors for Teaching Excellence, which is handed out each summer at their annual fundraising auction. So the weekend is full of inspiring events, exhibitions, and open studios. Dorothy was showered with speeches and recognition that weekend, all of which she accepted with great humility. She also managed to get some time in the glass studio while she was there. It seemed unimaginable that she would be at Penland and not be creating something. The weekend exposed me to the magic of Penland for the first time, and after that event, I was invited back to teach basketry for the textile department the following year. Yet another magical door opened to me through Dorothy's invitation to join her. What stood out for me and was most heartwarming was to see Dorothy there with so many colleagues and past students, all with obvious joy and gratitude for her creative, warm human spirit. On many levels, Dorothy touched so many lives in a deep and meaningful way.
Great, thank you, Joan. Our next speaker is Jill Green. Jill is a basketry fiber artist. She grew up in Iowa and has lived in Seattle, Washington for over 40 years. Seattle's been an incredible community for her to learn baskets, meet and be with other basket makers and do her artwork. Jill's had the good fortune to study with wonderful, inspiring teachers, including Dorothy Gill Barnes.
Hello, welcome from Seattle. I met Dorothy in 1989 when she came here to teach at the Summer Art Institute at the University of Washington. It was a 2-week workshop, and I feel really grateful to have had that experience with her. But my story is about when she received the 2015 National Basketry Organization Lifetime Achievement Award. The picture is her name tag that she wore during that conference. And this was in St. Paul. The award recognizes the work of individuals whose work has influenced the field of American basketry and acknowledges superior achievement over the course of an entire career. And Dorothy sure deserved this one. One of the days after the presentation, I had the honor of ushering her to make rounds through all the classes. We crashed the classes. These were taught by well-known basketry artists and teachers. And as we wandered around and walked into the classes, there was just such joy and glee as she was greeted by everybody. And there were lots and lots of pictures. Everybody got out their cell phone and took pictures of her too. One of her comments was she's never had her photograph taken so many times. Go to the next one, please. One of the most fun classes was visiting Vladimir Yamich's class and he's the Russian basket maker, and he was teaching birch bark. And of course, once she saw the boots, she had to put them on. So that was quite a hysterical a few minutes with her with the boots on. You can see how happy she was. Next one, please. This is the note that she wrote, I think it was to Lois. And she was thanking her for the Lifetime Award and the great opportunity to be with everybody and the joy of the memories. And that's exactly how it was too. We just had a lot of fun that time. Next one. One of the things that we did at the conference was we got the fabled box out and spread it out on that table so that people could wander through and look at everything. Now I'm going to tell you more about this fabled box. It's an old Craftsman band saw box, and it's about the size that fits in her suitcase. And I think of it as a sketchbook with photos, samples, experiments, items to inspire her. And this is the outside of the box. The photograph of the fellow with the bicycle tree, if you Google bicycle in a tree, this, you can still see lots of pictures of this. It's over on Vashon Island here in Washington State. And I think she probably really liked that with her love of bicycles and bark and trees. I'm sure that really caught her imagination. So looking at the items inside the box, next one, please. I bet you that there's a story for every single thing in here. It's just a magical teaching tool that she would get out so that the students could look at it and touch things and think about, well, gee, maybe I could do that. So it was just full of fascinating objects that share her discoveries. I'm not sure the first time I saw it. I think maybe there was one time she was in a hotel room and I met her up there as she was packing to go to her next destination. And when I walked in the room, she greeted me and she says, oh, there's the box over there. So I got to explore it to my heart's content. Another time I saw the box was at her talk for the New York Textile Study Group in 2014. It was a lucky coincidence that we were there at the same time as her talk, and it was a wonderful experience. After her slideshow and her presentation, she got the box out and she spread the contents out for everybody to see. And I mean, the group gathered around to marvel at all these things. There was no way I could get a picture of it. And then I already said that she had brought it to the NBO conference and we saw it there too. Thank you. Oh, these are more items. This is an old picture. And I found it on the internet, and I think it might have gone with an article that her daughter Juliet wrote. And you can see a lot of the items in here. This picture may be 20 years old, I'm not sure. But you get an idea when it's all spread out. There's about 50 things.
Thank you so much, Jill. It's hard to believe all those things fit in a little tiny soft box. Thank you. Our next speaker is Pat Hickman. Pat is a full-time studio artist living in the lower Hudson Valley. She is a professor emerita of art from the University of Hawaii. Her studio is at the Garnerville Arts and Industrial Center in New York. Hickman's work is in many major collections, including the Renwick Gallery, the Smithsonian Institution, and the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, to name just a few. Her Gate commission, Nets of Makali'i, Nets of the Pleiades, stands at the Maui Arts and Cultural Center. Hickman twice received NEA grants and serves on the National Basketry Organization Board and is on the National Arts Advisory Council of the Textile Center in Minneapolis. Welcome, Pat.
Thank you. I can't remember exactly when I first met Dorothy. I certainly was aware of her work before we met in the 80s. Our paths just kept crossing. I knew in the 90s when I was curating an exhibition for the University of Hawaii's Art Gallery that Dorothy's work had to be included in this show entitled Baskets, Redefining Volume and Meaning. Fortunately, we were able to get funding, sending 11 invited artists $1,500 for travel and shipping of 6 works each. In April 1993, Dorothy came and lectured on woods and water and on baskets beginning with nature. Then she taught a workshop. She tromped around with my students at Lion Arboretum, respectfully gathering materials which she saw as pure potential, amazed at the growth available in Hawaii. This work, Cherry Bark with Yucca Lining, is one which was in that exhibit. Dorothy said that she created it while on jury duty, quietly twining the yucca lining in her lap. Next, Dorothy and I overlapped many times at Haystack in Maine. New Works there was a time when faculty who'd been there previously teaching might gather for a long Labor Day weekend and just work on our own making in the studios. In 2011, Dorothy discovered river teeth on the long path in the woods at Haystack. She generously introduced them to me, showing me how if you wiggle one of these and it's ready to let go, it's a gift from the tree. River teeth are these pointy extensions inside a tree, invisible, but what holds a branch to the trunk. Next slide. One time when I was there and she wasn't, she sent me a drawing of one river tooth she needed, wanting me to find her one the same size and shape. Not easy in nature. Next slide. But I was lucky and found one she could use to complete this piece. Nancy Halpern, an artist who was also at Haystack with us in 2012, wrote, I remember being astonished that the little sprite of a woman in our studio was Dorothy, since from looking at pictures of her baskets, I'd imagined they were made by a giant earth mother. I recognized the bark of a piece of wood she had on her table because I'd just seen the rare tree that has it at the Mount Auburn Cemetery in Cambridge. I asked her how she happened to have it, and she said, oh, the groundskeepers saved me all the interesting wood. Wow, I thought, no one saves me wood. Next slide. It was fun at Haystack to be at Haystack when Dorothy was, making runs together to the Deer Isle dump, finding a hidden meadow next to a beach where we could walk and pick up what was washed up on the rocks or the sand. After one such trip to the dump with artist Bobby Hansen, who made musical instruments out of his finds, Dorothy and I did a performance piece. I learned that Dorothy and Joan had braided Bobby's beard at the Saskatchewan International Artists Collaborative gathering. At Haystack, Dorothy and I cut off Bobby's long white braided beard, this fully with his permission and lots of laughter. This piece, Mill Creek Willow, it has sections of peeled bark, which I think better reveals the corkscrew shape of the willow and shows the dark light contrast when it's there or not there. I see dancing and movement in the structural elements that Dorothy brings together. Next slide. In this detail, it's possible to feel Dorothy's process of joinery, her hands holding units in place. She devised completely new, individually invented methods to make baskets. Next slide. Sometimes she managed to treat bark as if it were fabric, gently folded, malleable. When she came to talk not too long ago at the Textile Study Group of New York, Nancy Koenigsberg spotted Dorothy on the crowded New York subway platform, finding her before the presentation, leading her to where we meet. After her talk, she showed us the treasures in her famous box. This tiny woman, giant in her impact and on our field, brought things together, unlikely things in her building, in her making of sculptural basketry structures. She kept exploring her whole life. I have great respect for Dorothy, for her studio work, and for her curious mind. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Okay, our last speaker is Amie Adelman. Amie is a professor in the College of Visual Art and Design at the University of North Texas in Denton. She received an MFA in fibers from the University of Kansas and a BFA from fibers and Arizona State University. Through numerous travel grants, Amie has conducted international textile research in Africa, Europe, and South America. Images of her artwork appear in numerous books and journals, and Amie participated in several artist in resident programs. All right, Amie.
Thank you. The last workshop that Dorothy taught was for the students enrolled in the fiber courses at the University of North Texas. She taught the 2-day workshop at my home in Azle, which is just northwest of Fort Worth. She was 86 years old and super excited about her birthday that was coming at the end of the month. Since the bark used in the workshop needed to be pliable, my husband and I got up early each morning to saw down large branches for the students. We left the branches by the trees so that the students had to investigate the property to find just the right branch. On the first day of the workshop, Dorothy shared her samples from the box, which included an invaluable assortment of items that the students could touch and contemplate. We learned how to use a utility knife to make dendroglyphs in trees and remove bark from branches. We talked about the different surfaces and how marks made by nature, animals, or humans can be an integral part to the overall piece. We would braid, weave, and experiment with endless ways to manipulate the bark. After the students explored the property and collected items such as branches, rocks, shells, and vines, each student was challenged to work in silence while making identical forms for their collections. Not all of the finished forms were placed on the table. Some identical pieces were site-specific, hidden in trees or rocks or landscape, which my husband and I would find much later. On the second day, Dorothy emphasized the importance of play and making something that we're not going to sell or exhibit, but something to learn from. She did this in her own work, and through experimentation, she came up with the next project while playing with filbert trees in Oregon. She called these installations needle breeze. It included 2 branches and a large sewing needle. To make a needle breeze, we cut a branch from a tree and turned the branch upside down. Then limbs were shortened or removed so that the branch could stand on its own. Once the branch was stable, a large sewing needle, head down, was inserted into the branch. A second branch was then strategically balanced horizontally on the needle's tip. Everyone who had a chance to work with Dorothy was touched by her love and respect for nature and her ability to transform bark. Dorothy had a positive impact on my group of students and countless others. In fact, one participant remarked it was the highlight of my university experience.
Great, thank you so much, Amie. Yeah, I can say from personal experience that being in a workshop with Dorothy was definitely a memorable. I remember I got to be in one at the beginning of my graduate work, and it really made a huge impact on me. What we wanted to do now, we're going to have a little bit of time for questions, but before that, what we'd like to do is share a video clip where we can hear Dorothy talking in her own words. So.
My name is Dorothy Barnes, and I'm originally from Iowa, and I'm now in Ohio. The things that I like to do most in my artwork are outdoors. I like very much to work with wood. I am now adding a little bit of glass once in a while, but mostly being outdoors matters to me and has since I was a child. The wood is very raw usually. Bark is my favorite material. The springtime, when the bark is softening and I go to look for material, it's a lot of fun. I like being outdoors. When I was little, we had a backyard in Iowa, a place where my sister and I used to play under the asparagus bed and make little parks and things like that. And I often used materials that I would find outside and put them some way into the house and decorate with them. I found ways to do things like decorating the stage when our little village would have things going on. I didn't have any regular art training until I went to college and university. Both places had a little too much of the drawing, and painting was not terribly interesting to me. but I still like to work outdoors, and started, I think, designing things from the use of wood and doing quite a lot with materials for my own clothing, quite a lot of sewing. When I graduated, had some opportunities to show work and then to exhibit and to teach and do other things in different parts of the country where things were very different outdoors in each place. In the time of year when there is no bark and I have to go somewhere else, I've been fortunate to be able to go down to Australia to work where the time of year is different. So I can get the bark that will come off. Usually in my part of the world here, it would be through early May to July. With the knife, I can take from a tree that needs to be trimmed or for some reason can share its bark with me. I can cut it and it comes off with just a zip. So fun. It comes off really loose and easy to use. I can work with it directly, or I can dry it and even put it in the freezer. Went to Coe College in Cedar Rapids, Iowa first, and then I went to 1 year at Minneapolis College of Art where I started doing some sewing and stitchery and fabric, but didn't go over very well. And then went to Iowa City where I graduated. That's where I met my husband, and we were both interested in art and music.
Okay, that was just a little bit from her own words. I hope you really enjoyed listening to all these stories, and as much as I did. I think that it was just a really terrific program to hear from so many different people that knew Dorothy so well. I think I'm going to turn it back over to Pam, and we're going to take some questions if anybody has any.
Actually, hard to believe there are no questions. So if anybody has a question, now is a great time to put it in the Q&A section. It's at the bottom kind of right side of your screen if you don't know where to look. And maybe there's some other stories or other things you all would like to share with one another. What do you think?
I have a question for Ann. Can you talk a little bit about Dorothy's studio and like what that was like?
She turned every place she was into a kind of studio. And, but she had on the back of her garage was a little room that was her studio. And one of the people, it's Joan. Joan had a couple of pictures of the inside of the studio. And it, like her box, whatever was front and center at any given moment was just kind of added on top of everything else that had interested her. So it was always filled with different pieces of bark, different pieces of wood, sometimes things being stored, but it had the two most important things to her were that it had beautiful windows that looked out on the outside, and there was a nice breeze. And actually, both in the studio and in her carport, things started growing from the outside inside. And she loved that. And she never wanted me to try to clear them off. So she, that's another one of those sort of, the jargon word is liminal zones, the sort of things in between, like the place where the tree starts and the roots end, or the branches, go into the tree and don't end there. But, and her basement was filled with things. Her basement was where she had her saw, her table saws, and then she would and her kitchen table was very often a studio zone because it was close to the water. She used old, outdoors, she used old eaves, eaves troughing from around the house to soak those long those long shag bark pieces in, and other long strips of bark that she wanted to have be pliable to use. It's every place, yeah.
Okay, so we do have some questions now from our wonderful audience. So Andrea wants to know, what will become of Dorothy's studio? Do any of you know that answer?
Her children, nothing in it is going to be pitched. Her children are in the process of, I mean, they can't get back to Ohio right now. But I and some other people that worked real closely with her are going to try to separate finished pieces from materials, the stockpiles of peeled and partly peeled willow and, you know, all kinds of other stuff that there is, and then offer them to her students and friends, her students and friends that can get to Ohio to continue to work with.
Thank you. So Cricket wants to know, did she publish any written work?
I don't think she ever published anything in her own words. There are a number of publications about her, most of which are, there's a sort of a pretty major book, and she's been in a lot of other books. Some of those are listed on Grada's website, and the other Ann has some knowledge of here too, yes.
In doing my research for her biography, I found in the archives at the Smithsonian is an extensive interview. It's, I don't know, dozens of pages long. And
26.
Yeah, it's a really long and involved multi-day interview. And it's a great resource. You can find it on the internet, and I can send it to somebody if they want.
We listed it at the back of our presentation.
Yeah, it was done in 2004.
Did we show that page, Amie?
We didn't, but once it's online, they can have access to it.
Or else at the end of this, we could put that image up and they could screen snap it.
That's possible. So Nancy wants to know, are there any considerations for the longevity of the natural materials after her harvesting, insect destruction, decay, etc.?
Can I do this? Yeah, I mean, Dorothy worked very hard to make sure that by the time she was showing or selling things, there weren't any insect infestations. But she would always say that, you know, wood shrinks, wood grows. If you keep it in very, very climate controlled places, that can be minimized. But she has had some of her work that is at the Renwick. I think she needed to do some repairs on once. And particularly later in her life, as she was talking with Amie's students about playing and experimenting and not worrying about selling, you know, things that she became less concerned about having things be precious and perfect and remain that way, and more willing to let things be what they were for as long as they were, and then go back to nature. So, which the hickory basket has. Yeah. It popped.
So here's, where is the best place to go to see examples of her work in person once the pandemic is over?
Right now, I mean, I don't know about best, but some collector of her work has given 4 or 5 or 6 pieces to the DeYoung Museum in San Francisco. And as of November, at least some of them were on display. And I don't know where else, but Racine, the Racine, Wisconsin Museum of Art has a fairly large collection of her work. I don't know what they always have on display, if anything. Jack Lerner Larson's, what is his place called? He has a beautiful piece.
Yeah, Longhouse.
Well, yeah, Longhouse, that's it. He has a beautiful piece, but I have no idea whether it's out. Dorothy was hurt that her piece was not taken out at the Renwick for its reopening. But I mean, museums are where you could maybe see it. Perhaps at some of these lovely basket makers' houses, because she often gave things away to friends.
So here's another one. Some anonymous, I like anonymous, says, I don't quite understand dendroglyphs. Do they stay on the tree or were they cut off the tree? Did it hurt the tree?
It doesn't hurt the tree. And they both stay on the tree and come off the tree because they go through the bark into the tree. And so they stay in the, yeah, here we go. They both stay in the wood and in the bark, and the bark comes off the tree and it stays in the wood until maybe the tree is cut down and used for something else.
I remember also reading that historically, I think it was sheep herders would mark trees, and that was one of the ways she kind of learned about these. Is that correct?
Yeah, she had a book that was about shepherds in the Southwest and their drawings on trees. And I think that there also are other cultures that have done drawings on trees at different times, maybe in the Australia and New Zealand islands areas.
And so, yeah, you'd mark into the bark.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember reading in her biography that sometimes she would leave things for a few weeks, sometimes months, sometimes a few years. So the longer you left it, the more the tree would sort of do its work.
Yeah, yeah.
So Carissa says, someone mentioned, one of you, of course, her daily rhythm, daily practices, rituals. Anybody want to share their experience of that? We're at noon, so we'll go a few minutes longer just to go through some more of these questions.
I'll go back to that place. Dorothy had funny little rituals that I admired. She always listened to a poetry reading by Garrison Keillor. At least, I don't know how long that was on the radio, but she would stop what she was doing. I had to stop what I was doing. And if it was at noon, you had to put down everything and listen to this poem. So I know she loved poetry. That was one of the rituals. The other one was she would make dinner and she'd have it all ready, but she would go by herself off to her hammock and with a can of beer. And so she'd made the dinner, she'd had her day, but she just wanted to give herself that little moment to herself before calling dinner was ready. And I was there when her husband was still alive. So that really impressed me that she would give herself that time. And she just paid so much attention to the birds outside the dining room window and making sure they were fed, and the flowers outside the door, those marigolds, Anne. So she just had so much, she saw everything and paid attention to everything that was around her. She wasn't oblivious to these things at all. So that's what I meant by that.
I have noticed that two participants, sorry, I dropped off, my internet decided to be unstable, have raised their hands, but of course there's nothing I can do about it unless you put something in the Q&A section. So Nolan had a question and we might have already answered it because I see it's gone. So I don't know what your question was. And I'm just looking to see if there's anything else that we need to deal with. Pat, of course, you need to unmute yourself, Pat. I just did for it. Unmute yourself, please.
I did.
Okay.
I have a question for Ann or Joan. Did Dorothy's husband ever play music or create music or compose music that was related to her baskets in response to her work?
I don't think he ever composed anything in response to her work, but he composed stuff that was his own sort of reactions to nature and play. I know that, and she loved having the music throughout the house all the time, and but I don't know that. And she did one piece that was kind of an homage to him, but I don't know that he ever did, not that I'm aware of, or not that I recall ever hearing, but I know he would play to her. She loved to have him play to her.
Thank you.
I think we've kind of run our course for this presentation. Oh, sorry, Ann, you're hidden. Yes, Ann.
I was just going to say, why don't everybody tonight, before you have your dinner, raise a glass, might be seltzer water, might be a beer, might be whatever, and just think of Dorothy and the tremendous contribution she made to the basketry and art community. And I'm sure I've just really enjoyed. I wanted to say thank you so much to all our panelists and Amie Adelman, who worked really hard getting all the slides and images all together. It was a big job, and it was really fun working with you, Amie. But let's raise a glass to Dorothy tonight, and to all that she contributed to all of us. And everybody that came, I wanted to just say thank you so much, and be well.
So I want to thank everybody on behalf of NBO for joining this program. I hope you enjoyed it. In particular, I have to thank our amazing board members, Ann and Amie, for managing this program, and all the panelists, Pat, Jill, Ann, and Joan, for participating, and all the work all of you put into this program. What you all don't see are the several practices leading up to today. And so everybody has put their time and energy into this. The recording will be available next week on our website. There is no link presently because it doesn't exist yet. And once again, you can help support NBO Presents by using the Donate tab on our homepage. I have also added the direct link to donate in the Q&A if you want to check that out. And we will be doing another NBO Presents in February towards the end of the month. It's promising to be wonderful, but I'm not going to tell you what it is. We know, but it's a secret right now. So hopefully you'll join us, and we appreciate your time. And I'm just going to ask the panelists to remain on for a few minutes, and thank you to the audience for joining. We really appreciate it. Too bad we can't see you, but there you have it. Thank you.
Isn't that thank you for sign language?
Oh, I don't know.
It's like I'm doing it too fast probably. I think it's where you kind of, I don't know, something like that.
I'm watching everybody sign out.
I forgot to thank you.
For recording too.
Pam, thank you so much.
Yeah.
For your hard work. I should have said that. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's my pleasure. We're down to 11. Hopefully. Up 9. And we worked it out with Pat number 2, so that was good.
Was she able to get on?
she did through you. And then, of course, I was in the middle of that call, like right after I finished my intro.
Okay.
So I did mute and hide her video. So then that was fine.
Okay,
We
good.
adore her, so she can sit in the back.
Right. Okay.
Wonderful.
So I really want to thank all of you so much for all your work. You know, it was, I think it was
fun.
great. Yes. I hope that, yeah, I thought that I'm trying to remove everybody.
It was really fun. I really, you know, it's nice to hear it. I kind of was able, when in the practice, I was so kind of discombobulated, but this time I really listened, and it was very, very informative and fun. And I hope our group probably really enjoyed it.
I so loved having a chance to meet all of you. I mean, you know, Amie and I have corresponded over the years, and others. I knew your names. I knew Jill's book from the award event, but it just has been. It's meant so much for me and helped me. At a, you know, when her loss is very raw, to know how much she meant to all of you.
Yeah, it's meant a lot to me too. Yeah.
Well, and the fact that you were sharing such intimate details with like 89 people, I think that was our max today. That's aside from the 7 of us. You know, it's a wonderful experience. And yes, the video will be up sometime next week. And
maybe I can put credits on it.
Yes.
Yeah, we're working on that.
We're working on that.
You know, like right now we're still recording, so we got to get this chopped off. So
right. So
get
but that's easier to delete at the end, I think.
Yeah.
Right.
But well, yeah, I just wanted to thank everybody as well, getting information and getting information on time, like working with this many people and always knowing I was going to get a response and get it in timely. It just really made my end so easy.
Oh, you did a great job.
Yeah.
I can't imagine it going any better than it did.
Yeah, it seemed it really flowed well. I thought, you know, it seemed pretty smooth.
It did.
Which is great.
So thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a nice weekend.
And everybody stay in touch.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.